Greetings, folks. This is Scott, and you're tuning into A Woman's Place, the podcast where we break down all the policies and politics that affect the 51%. That's right, women are half the US population, and Ashley and I are here to give you the facts about how today's events are affecting them. Find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Good morning, Ashley Brown. Happy, what are we, March, the middle of March.
It is the middle of March, which
Ides of March, I think.
it's
Maybe we're
coming
almost
up.
past the Ides of March.
It's coming up. So March 15th, right, is the Ides of
Yeah,
March.
yeah.
So
Beware,
we're
beware.
we're everywhere. So I just want to take a minute to congratulate you on a fantastic Through Women's Eyes Film Festival. And I know you're happy that it is was done and behind you and was a success. So congrats.
Thank you. Thank you very it felt very successful. And we still deeply believe in the mission and we love entertaining audiences and supporting filmmakers. So it did feel really good. Thank you. I
Yeah.
appreciate it. And it was great to see some of you there Friday and on the weekend. So thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Okay, so
So should we dive in? I was thinking about what we did last week when I was refreshing and we had our DEI take two and
yes.
we covered all the human factors and why and the opposition. And I think that was really worth talking about. It's going to be a constant topic, but I think we covered a lot in the last two sessions.
Yeah, no, I think it was good. And I think encouraging people to connect with information and dig a little deeper instead of getting wrapped up into some of the emotions that go around it. If that happens, even with one person, it's a win.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
There was some interesting news just today about what different corporations are doing, how they're handling. That might have to be a whole other session, but it's so fascinating because many of them you can sense they really want to stick to it, but they're changing the language. And I think we'll come up with language again today. They're changing the language. They want something that's for all the people, or, some other words we found. Because as we mentioned last section, companies really know they have a diverse workforce and a diverse
Mhm.
consumer base. So yeah, they're changing their language. But let's move on, shall we?
Let's move on. Anything going on in the world or the country,
Things are going
Scott?
on in the world. Yeah, so two things I thought worth highlighting this past week. The first one is just I think it came out officially yesterday from the United Nations, which just concluded what's called the CSW, which is the Commission on the Status of Women. They have a whole week-long meeting and all things women are discussed at a global level and lots of not-for-profits, government agencies. But the thing that caught my eye is the Secretary General of the UN, and I will quote here, said women's rights are under siege. And after that, 193 nations all committed to speed action on gender equality. What he was quoted as saying is the poison of patriarchy is back, and it is back with a vengeance. And they specifically cited concerns about reproductive rights and backtracking on the environment that creates equality for women. So this is a global phenomenon that a lot of people are watching. So we will definitely keep our eyes on that, but that happened this week.
Well, and I think that in future episodes, we're going to dig a little into reproductive rights and
Yes.
why that's so paramount to women's opportunities and economic success and
Yeah, why it's such a
autonomy and
floor.
all of it. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But something else this week that I just want to put out, we won't spend too much time today, but the Department of Education and the huge cuts in workforce. The department was not per se eliminated. That's a little harder to do, but huge cuts in workforce. And that affects many people. But as I think we've talked about earlier, this could have special ramifications for women for a couple of reasons. One thing, women now get higher ed degrees far more than men, and they complete those degrees more than men. So it's likely that if things like student loans are affected, women are going to be disproportionately affected. There's an issue about loan forgiveness as well. I think women tend to be in industries with loan forgiveness. And I think, Ashley, you know something about that, right? Is that correct? That
I
women tend
do.
to be where they're more likely to get loan forgiveness?
Well, and there's, I think, two parts of this that I would just encourage people to pay attention to is one, the Department of Ed and the student loan aspect of it is such an important piece. I think people still think curriculum and the education, But where it impacts women, I think, most is the student loan piece. And two-thirds of women are student loan
Older
borrowers,
student loans, right? Two-thirds
right?
of student loans are held by women.
Yes. And then the public service loan forgiveness. So for people working in government, in 501(c)(3) nonprofits, within some teachers in rural areas, if they work for 10 years in that industry or for that organization, they can get their student loan forgiven. If you think about that and think libraries, think education, think nonprofits, like even in Florida, um, 60 of nonprofit employees, 65% are female. So again,
Mm.
when you're looking at the types of industries that are benefit from that public service student loan forgiveness, again, a greater impact on women. I feel there's a theme.
There is the thing.
Yeah.
There's another one that I thought about, which again we're going to have to watch to see the ramifications. But a lot of people are concerned about the support for children with disabilities if the education funding for that dries up. And it's well documented that women tend to be the primary caregivers, especially if children with disabilities can't get services and support in some public schools. There's going to be a huge gap, and there's a lot of concern that's going to fall to women who have many other things going on in their lives, let's just say.
Well, you set up a beautiful transition, but before we transition into finally the caregiving economy, people have been on the edge of their seats waiting for the
Yes,
care.
they have.
I think you
They
and I
have
have
fans.
been.
Wait, here we come.
But I do think encouraging all of us to find information, find reasonable solutions to some of these opportunities we have to create policies and to enact policies that are benefiting people and supporting people instead of, I don't know, I feel like we're in a big pendulum swing of just slashing without being thoughtful. So
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
just it feels bad.
Mm.
And when there's that uncertainty, I think that uncertainty just tends to bring about all kinds of disruption on your daily life, and it's not a fun place to be. So anyway.
Yeah, and obviously a lot of this cutting is under the guise of waste, but it's very clear that many programs are things that the public actually care deeply about having, for
Hmm.
example, student loans or support for students with disabilities. So
Right.
that could be a whole section in itself. But let's start on the care economy. Let's talk
Yes.
a little bit about, and I was thinking about this and I thought, and you tell me if I'm wrong about how I define it, because I know you spent a lot of time on this, but this is the economic sector that cares for people. And I'm thinking things like childcare and care for people who are ill or disabled or elderly. And that's both paid and unpaid work. Is that
Mhm.
right? Is there another section I'm missing?
No, I think that we forget about the unpaid, or no, sorry, the paid at times, because there is that focus on people having to leave the workforce or choosing not to go into the workforce because they have, well, you gave a perfect example. If they have somebody with a disability, a child with a disability, and need to stay home to care for that person. But I do think we forget about the paid caregiving
Hmm.
economy and what that includes, and thinking of the people that are taking care of some of our most vulnerable, the
Hmm.
elderly with CNAs and that service industry that is traditionally underpaid or lower wages.
Right, right. And if I'm not mistaken, women shoulder the burden or have the privilege, whatever you want to call it. They perform care work, 70 to 80% of the care work, both paid and unpaid globally. I know you might have more up-to-date US statistics, but I know from global records and from UN Women that women perform close to 80% of the unpaid care work globally. And I believe it's between 70 and 80% of the paid. I mean, women spend 5% more, 5 times more than men on unpaid care work. So that's a huge responsibility and a huge chunk of their lives.
It's a little Lower in the US, not much though,
Okay.
66, 67%. So, still two-thirds. In the US, two-thirds seems to be a theme on women being represented in statistics that we don't want to be represented in, that
Hmm.
two-thirds of us are being impacted by. And, I do think that talking about the feminization of the care economy, and so why is it that women are just naturally seen as the person that's going to be the caregiver? Is that part of our socialization
It's interesting.
conversation?
I think it's a couple things. It's absolutely part of our socialization from very, very early on. How girls and boys are socialized to be responsive to one another. Women are typically, quote unquote, trained to follow social cues much more, and that makes them more attuned to the needs of people. They see modeling. The vast majority of us still see modeling of our mothers, aunts, grandmothers, sisters doing that work. And men are often disparaged. More importantly, men are often disparaged for doing some sort of care work, for showing a nurturing side, for
Mhm.
example. It's really, in many circles, not part of a masculine code, and that is really socially policed. So there's a lot of socialization, both on women and men, I would say,
Mhm.
to segregate this kind of work. There's also workplace culture that then feeds into that. I
Mhm.
think we don't want to just say it's all socialization. I mean, it's pretty well documented that, especially in some industries, there has been active discrimination, so that women are not hired or promoted at the same rates as men. And we talked about this a little with DEI, but it's both socialization and discrimination for sure. I think
Well,
also one thing that we have to think about is the sort of circular impact of women doing caregiving. Because women are caregivers for people at home, they're more likely to need flexible work. They're more likely to need work that can permit that schedule. Children go to school from 7:30 to 2:30, and the workday at least used to be from 9 to 5. Well, somebody's institutionally set up to not make it work well. So
right.
there's also factors, institutional factors, you might say, that mean women are more likely to do that work, and therefore they're more likely to need flexible care work, not have the same demands that other work might require. So it almost becomes a vicious cycle.
No, I think it definitely does. And as we get ready to transition into what are some of the impacts and effects of the care economy, I do want to touch on for some women and probably to a lesser degree men, there's value in caregiving. Like that's where some people find their value is
Mhm.
in serving as a caregiver or taking care of the family or taking care of their children. And the issue is not everybody has the economic security to be able to do that, which is
Mhm.
where the rubber meets the road, kind of on
Oh, and
that
this isn't
piece.
to devalue the importance. If anything, I think we should be valuing it more highly. It's not to say that things like taking care of children is less valuable. In fact, I think it should be seen as more valuable, and therefore be given more support, be more highly paid for people who do it for pay, etc. It's not that, being a mother, for example, or caring for elderly parents is unimportant. It should be seen as more important in our economic system, not just something that women, if they're available, will do for free, which essentially says it has no economic value, which we know is not true.
We know is not true. I think that you are spot on with that and making sure that we have systems that create that value. And if it is going to be unpaid, is there a value that's assigned for, as an example, working people? We pay into the Social Security system. So when we're looking at our retirement, how many years have we worked generating income? Is there some credit that's applied if you are a full-time caregiver and that's you haven't been able to work because of who knows? Like,
Is
like I
that being
think that there's
discussed? Is that being discussed anywhere with any seriousness?
no, it should be.
Hmm.
I mean, I think that because it doesn't always have to be a a dollar paid, it could be credit
Hmm.
for. So that's kind of in my dream world, Scott, of
Mm. But there's really
having credit.
costs to society, aren't there, of having, I don't know, inadequate or expensive childcare? You hear so much about people who can't afford childcare. What's the cost to the rest of us, even those of us who don't have children, you might say?
There's a huge economic impact to, and let's just stick on childcare for a second. When we
Hmm.
look at inconsistent or lack of affordable childcare in our region, childcare is the number two expense in a household budget. It's almost on par with a mortgage.
Followed by after housing or rent or mortgage or something, it's
Yes.
number two.
And
It's
it's
amazing.
close. And there was a
Amazing.
statistic that just came out, and I'm going to find it on how many states that childcare is more expensive than college tuition. I think it was 38 states. I need to find that stat, and that just kind of popped into my head. But so when you look at the cost of childcare, that makes it a barrier for a lot of families to be able to have access to it. So that means there's lower labor force participation rate. It means that there's less money to put into the economy. There's the economic impact for career growth if women or whomever is going to be the caregiver has to work a different job or the flexibility
Hmm.
needs the flexibility for their caretaking responsibilities. They're behind the eight ball before they even get started at building toward financial security. And that's just within the family. But when you look at the communities, the employers are impacted because of the workforce that's available. And then the economic cost in the US is in the 119 billion um,
Billion with a B.
with a B. And the state of Florida, the Florida Chamber Foundation released a report last year on the economic impact of inconsistent or lack of childcare, and it was 5.4 billion with a B just to the state of Florida. So, I mean, it's real. These are real dollars that are having that impact. And I think it was in the the 2021 was the last US chamber, sorry, that was
Hmm.
57 billion annually in lost productivities and earnings for labor
Hmm.
force.
So
Um,
this is what affects all of us, really. Even if it's not coming out of pocket to me to pay for childcare, this is affecting all of us.
It affects all of us because then that's our tax base and that's where
Hmm.
things for you know, our roads, our infrastructure, all of those, our schools are done. And speaking of schools, not only is again that economic impact on the family, on employers, on our communities, but the development for the children of
Hmm.
being in whether it's voluntary pre-K or a quality childcare space, that their developmental just
So,
impact is impacted and they're not reading on grade level and there's more work to be done as they enter
right, right,
school.
right.
So it's really when you think of the trickle down effect of what is the impact of childcare, and that's a direct result of the caregiving economy. I mean, it's real dollars and cents. It's not
Absolutely.
yeah.
So can I ask? I don't know if you have in front of you. So why is it so expensive? If we talk about the huge burden on people and huge burden on families, I never think of childcare workers getting paid very well. Do we know why it's so expensive? Is it just a shortage of availability or what's happening?
Well, I think there were a couple of things when we talk about going back to the service industry or
Yeah.
the pay rates. The pay rates traditionally for childcare workers was very low. And if you had the option of working at Starbucks making $20 an hour or working taking care of children for $12 an hour, that's maybe that's not a hard decision for some people to make. So one, I think the cost of hiring quality people to take care of, again, a really important part of our community,
Hmm. Hmm.
they need to be paid a living wage. So I think that
Hmm.
adjustment in a living wage was a big issue. I think some of the cuts to childcare subsidies and being able to bridge that gap for working families has come into play. Um, and the liability of, which we
Hmm.
need
Hmm.
lots
Sure,
of checks and balances in this, and the
sure.
number of kids that can be per um, childcare worker, teacher is important. So I think just the infrastructure of supporting is an expensive
Hmm.
measure.
It's
And
interesting. Yeah,
go
and I've
ahead.
always thought that pay scales will stay low. You know, pay scales for quote unquote manual labor. This is a form of manual labor. For men often seem to be higher. We value that work more highly, and this is not just some objective market force. It's the values we've put on it, and because the alternative value of childcare is basically free. You know, a family will find a sister or a grandmother or something to do it for nothing.
Mhm.
I always feel that that artificially suppresses what might be the pay scales because people see it as, well, mom's time is valueless. Let her stay home with the kids. I'm generalizing here. Or else pay X dollars. And that comparison, if the alternative is free, it's so hard for people to pay a lot because I agree, it's so important. Early childcare
Mhm.
is so important for children's development in addition to our society. And we pay so little for it in some
Well,
ways.
yeah, and you think of childcare, I think that there's been a lot of effort to increase teachers' wages,
Mm-hmm.
which
Mm-hmm.
again is important. But if you look at CNAs, which is a certified nursing assistant,
Mm-hmm.
childcare workers, service industries, which thinking of people that are taking care of, they are traditionally lower paid manual labor than what you
Mm-hmm.
consider
Mm-hmm.
manual labor traditionally for men in construction or even lawn care, that piece. So it's
Sure, sure.
interesting. It's an interesting thing to think about. And it's something that needs to be at the table when we're having discussions on, why are some of these things happening? And when we look at the overall representation, whether it's in corporate America or in our elected officials, there are less women at decision-making tables. So I think having
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
opportunity to increase in not only women, and I want to talk about that that a little
Sure.
bit, not only women, but people that understand the needs, the more diverse needs of members of the community, and having a voice there to say, hey, and I'm going to use an example, Fiona McFarland, who's one of our reps from
Sure.
Sarasota, who just had her fourth child, she brought up expanding healthcare for postpartum in the Medicaid. Expanding Medicaid, but not using Medicaid expansion, but expanding the quality of that care for mothers. The state of Florida also has some tax incentives for
Mm-hmm.
employers to be able to expand access to childcare, whether it's a subsidy or doing on-site childcare. PGT partnered with the Y on providing childcare for their
Mm-hmm.
employees. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, if it's your issue, like if it's something you're dealing with, it comes to mind when you're creating policies, right?
So you think it's both having women in positions of representation, but also getting men and others to understand the issues more. Is that what I'm hearing? It's not just a matter of electing women.
Correct. Because just because you're women doesn't mean that you're aligned with creating policies that support women.
Yes,
Is
no, we
that
do. We
right?
see that in a number of arenas. It's a reasonably good indicator. Most women are, more aware of those, but it is not a guarantee. Of course not. People
Yeah.
vary across the spectrum of policies, regardless of gender. That's very true. So what? do we do though? I mean, is it just a question of getting more women involved that we advocate for them, or what do we actually do?
Do you know, I think one thing is civic engagement can be an intimidating thing to say. Like, you need to
Hmm.
be more civically engaged. And what does that mean? And I think if we can make that more welcoming for people and less intimidating of we need to be paying attention to the things that are happening in our communities. And I think it starts in our communities, our local communities, and go up from there. So it's the asking questions on so if you're applying for a job, what are your policies around whether
Hmm.
it's family leave or maternity leave, paternity leave, because let's not feed into the narrative that it's only the woman's responsibility to be thinking about how
Hmm.
to take
Hmm.
care of if you're expanding your family. So I think engaging in questions to everything from city council, county, how are we investing dollars? How are our early learning coalitions being funded and who's being able to take advantage of those services? Because there's lots of working people that are
Hmm.
using early learning coalitions or some form of subsidies for childcare. And I don't think everyone's aware of that. Like, I just, I think informing
Yeah.
yourself is step one.
And I especially appreciate your point about um, asking employers or going through the private sector. Obviously, public sector, whether it's subsidies or tax benefits or credits in some way, is not the only solution. Most people work for the private sector, and I've always thought that asking about it for yourself, but also for others, even those of us who don't immediately have that need. It's important. I have friends who run their own small businesses, or they're getting jobs, or their children are getting jobs, and to keep it on the table. Hey, does your company have family leave policies? If you're
Mhm.
considering a new job, do they have pay equity policies? Are they looking at things like equal promotion? Because all of those feed into a workplace culture that's going to be more friendly to a range of needs. And I often think, right, just talking about it with people. And so when you mention companies, hey, do they have family leave policies? Do they have
Mhm.
equitable support? Keeps it in people's minds in a way. Even if we think maybe our elected representatives in any given time may or may not be supportive.
Right. Well, and I think that it goes to the whole ecosystem of how we have to work together and how interconnected we are, that if one piece is not working, there really is an impact to the others. And I think that we get in our silos of like, okay, here's my lane, but there's so much interconnectedness between not only safe, affordable, quality childcare to what is your future worker going to be? So, I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's very interconnected, and
Well,
I
it's interconnected too with women in poverty. I
hmm
mean, women
oh yeah,
are tend to be more likely to be in poverty in their later years, partly because they have to step out of careers very often. They have a financial challenge. They are what's the word I want? It's not disincentive, but they suffer financially with children, whereas men, in fact, do better with children. And this has been shown time and again. So that ties us into how are elderly women taken care of, where they tend to get less Social Security, et cetera. So it is connected very deeply to some of those policies.
it is, indeed, and again, when we think about the complexity of this topic, there's many layers, but I think being informed, I do think that there's a lot of people, once you talk about it, you see people like, oh yeah, this makes sense, but it's not an obvious thing that people are thinking about.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
think talking about it and getting informed and raising your hand when you see something that's like, huh, wait a minute, and I'm going to tell on me at the Women's Resource Center, which is my day job. We did not have a maternity leave policy in our employee handbook. Great, right? I mean, we are an organization for women. So because we didn't have anybody who needed it. And then when
Hmm.
we did, it was like, oh my gosh, we've got to address this. And so we worked as a team and got input on what was, we think, of fair and good policy. But, you know, I just say that to say sometimes people are not doing it intentionally, they're just not aware. So I think starting with
Were you
raising
able to have a
awareness.
paternity leave policy that was equal? Even if you don't have
Yes.
any men, just so that people know
Yes.
that this should go. Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
great. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
family leave, really.
It's family leave.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah.
Yes. So, thank you again as we're wrapping up another Women's Place with Scott and Ashley, which is fun. And
We are.
this is such a topic that is deeply personal to me. And, I think having a mom who worked in the home and worked as part of the family business, but never took a paycheck or a W-2, getting to see the impact in her life as she aged. It's probably why I beat the drum on this a lot.
So what are our takeaways here, Ashley? Certainly the impact, not only for families who need childcare, but for all of us and the rest of society, the impact on inadequate or unsuitable childcare, and then the burden is still placed almost universally on women, unpaid. Is that accurate? Or much of the burden is still on women.
Mhm.
And we need to get talking about it, both in public and private sectors. And people need to be advocating and asking questions, even if they don't have a recommendation, asking questions. What is being done? Knowing that
Mhm.
this is an issue. Is
Yeah.
that right? Yeah.
Absolutely. I think I think you hit the nail on the head, and I feel like the more we're talking about the things that matter to women and families, the impact on the community is going to be positive. And I think understanding how many times you find common ground with people you're talking to about these issues, and
Mm,
which is a nice,
absolutely.
it's a nice
Absolutely.
reminder.
It
um
is. Yes.
Before we leave, I wanted you to share a book recommendation
Oh, thank
that
you.
you had.
I love
Yes.
I love books. I love book recommendations. That actually I'd love to have a whole session on this, but I'm just gonna plug it and I have to get it out because I like it. So people, let's
Yeah,
see if we can get in the camera. Word Slut, Amanda Montell. Oops. Let's get the light right.
there you
Um,
go.
Super cool book, especially for people who are readers or who like words, but really for anybody else. I'm sure you can audio it if you don't want to sit and flip through it. But it really looks at some of the systemic ways in which we genderize so much. It made me so aware of what I call unnecessary gendering, in ways that feed into our socialization and our work lives and our economic lives. And it starts with words because words matter. So it's funny, it's a little irreverent, but it's very well documented that she did not just make this stuff up. So she researched it beautifully. Word Slut, Amanda Montell. Maybe if we're
Good.
really lucky, we'll get to talk to her one day.
So we'll include that and a link to some of the data we shared, as well as I would love to do a link to the film festival. So if anybody
Oh,
wanted to
absolutely.
see, yeah,
Absolutely. We will put that in there.
that
And what
would
are we doing
be.
next time, Ashley?
Well, do you know what? I think
Indeed.
it's time to talk about some Florida specific topics. So last year we had an amendment on the ballot, a constitutional ballot initiative on Amendment 4, which is expanding access to reproductive health care. So we're going to talk about that and the possibility of our lawmakers making it more restrictive to do citizen-led ballot initiatives. So things we need to
Okay.
know.
That'll
Things
be a
we need to
topic.
know.
Thank you,
Absolutely.
Ashley. See you then.
Thanks, Scott. Always good to be with you.
Take care.